The PFL puts on their biggest card in company history this weekend for Renan Ferreira versus Francis Ngannou, Battle of the Giants. Today we're going to take a look at that card and we're going to talk about, can the PFL on their biggest and best night compete with the UFC? So stick around to hear my thoughts. I'm Wyatt. This is Fight Society. All right, guys, so before we get into the video, please make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you very much. Back to the video. This Saturday in Saudi Arabia, PFL Super Fights pay-per-view, PFL Battle of the Giants, brace for impact, where Francis Ngannou, former UFC heavyweight champion, is going up against PFL regular season heavyweight champion Renan Ferreira in his return to MMA after fighting Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in boxing, where he lost both of those fights. Now, PFL president Don Davis has gone on record to say that they're going to spend as much money on the production of this event that the UFC did on the Sphere. Dana White very recently actually clowned him for this. But today we're going to take a look at this card because this is supposed to be their biggest and best night in company history. And this is supposed to be the co-leader, as Don Davis would put it, in MMA. And we're going to take a look at if the PFL on their absolute best night can even sniff the UFC. So we're going to start with the top of the card, which is a fantastic fight that I am actually very intrigued by. We have Francis Ngannou coming back to MMA after 2 boxing fights where he made a serious bag against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. He's going up against Renan Ferreira, who won the PFL regular season tournament at heavyweight last year. Now, this is better than some of the UFC heavyweight title fights that we've seen put on in the past. It's still them building a main event off of a former UFC champion. I've said this before, as I don't like how PFL and Bellator, when they were separated before the merger, how they have this strategy of just taking the UFC's former stars, which is not a way to build a brand. You look at yourself as, oh yeah, those guys go there when they're already washed up. And I'm not saying that's the case with Francis Ngannou because he actually chose to leave. He vacated the belt over contract negotiations and he went to the PFL. But the circumstances of Francis Ngannou ending up in the PFL are relatively irrelevant when it comes to the fans, especially UFC fans' view of the PFL. So I'm going to do a specific prediction for this fight right here in a separate video. It'll come out tomorrow. But this is a high-level heavyweight MMA fight. You have Francis, who's arguably the hardest puncher in the world, going against Renan Ferreira, who's 6'8", something like that. This is going to be a really tough fight for Francis. Renan Ferreira has been active in MMA where Francis hasn't. This is a type of fight where we might see Francis get stretched out. No Jones. Down from there, we have another PFL Super Fights championship. We have Larissa Pacheco and Cris Cyborg. It's frustrating that this fight happened, even though it's a cool fight. But it's frustrating because Cris Cyborg wanted a Kayla Harrison fight. Larissa Pacheco beat Kayla Harrison. Kayla Harrison left for the UFC. And so essentially this is just the leftovers. This is what was left on the plate after you ate what you really wanted, you know? So Kayla Harrison in the UFC. So they go, all right, the 2 best women that we have, they're going to fight Cris Cyborg and Larissa Pacheco in a fight that hardcore, super hardcore, I'll say super hardcores care about. And I'll watch the fight, obviously. I'm probably going to stream this pay-per-view. It's just not, it's not like anything that brings UFC fans over, for example. Like the main event will bring UFC fans over, even if it's just for one night. The Francis Ngannou and Renan Ferreira fight will actually bring viewers, whereas Cyborg and Pacheco, if you're watching this card, you were probably already going to watch it because of Francis and Renan Ferreira. Cris Cyborg and Larissa Pacheco is not going to draw eyes. But if we're talking about compared to women's title fights, this is a better women's title fight than the UFC puts on. So far, at the top of the card, you actually have 2 very good title fights that are on par with something you'd see in the UFC. And even down from there, you have 2 of the world's best middleweights fighting for the Bellator middleweight belt. You have Johnny Eblen rematching Leon Edwards' brother, Fabian Edwards. Johnny Eblen won the first fight, and they're rematching. This actually has a lot of heat on it, this rivalry right here. You have 15-0 against 13-3. Fantastic fight. This is also something that would be a UFC title fight. Now, I'm not saying that Bellator's middleweight division is on par with the UFC's, because it's not. But these are 2 world-class level, top 5 or 10 guys in the UFC middleweight division, in my opinion, Fabian Edwards and Johnny Eblen. I think that if you see these guys in the UFC, they perform relatively well. So back to the original point of this video is, can the UFC or can the PFL sniff the UFC? In these first 3 fights, they can in terms of fight quality, but I'm not sold on if they can actually compete with the UFC. from a production and a promotion standpoint, which I'll get to later in the video. But just from a fight quality standpoint, these are very good fights. Where the problem is, and what we've seen with a lot of UFC fight nights lately, the card falls off a cliff after those 3 fights, because earlier on the card, you have 2 145ers that I have never heard of. You can call me a casual. I don't care. Hussein Kadimagameyev against Zafar Mawson. Never heard of these guys. Why are they above AJ McKee and Paul Hughes on the card? That doesn't make sense, because AJ McKee versus Paul Hughes is actually a fantastic matchup. You have former Bellator featherweight champ AJ McKee, who moved up to 155. And then you also have former featherweight moved up to lightweight for PFL in Paul Hughes. And now, for those of you that don't know who Paul Hughes is, huge prospect coming out of Ireland at 145. Cage Warriors had 3 guys. Cage Warriors had 3 guys. Fantastic prospects, all at 145. Main eventers, all should be in the UFC, but only 2 of them are now. Morgan Charrier is the first one. You guys remember, he's the French guy with the gorilla tatted on his back. He is the XXX Tentacion looking dude. But he's in the UFC, and he got to the UFC before Jordan Vucenic, who beat him, if I'm not mistaken. And then Jordan Vucenic just got into the UFC in August on the Abu Dhabi card, which was Umar and Corey Sandhagen. He had to fight Guram Kutataladze up a weight class on short notice, had to fight at 55 just to get into the UFC. So they gave him a way harder time than they should have in getting into the UFC. And then Paul Hughes Paul Hughes got scooped up by the PFL. I'm sure they paid him a shitload of money to get him over there. And now he's fighting AJ McKee. So this is actually a super high level matchup for his first fight in a big time promotion. But I don't understand the placement on the card. It's somewhat redeeming of this fight right here that I don't know about. Card from there, we have Halfie and Stotts. Not bad. Actually, Halfie and Stotts fought Patchy Mixed for the bantamweight title. He's really good. Aside from that, it drops off a cliff there, guys. I mean, come on now. We got Makasharip Zainukov against Dedrick Sanders. And then you have 2 undefeated prospects, Ibrahim Ibrahimov and Nacho Campos. Then you have a Saudi Arabian, M. Rashed Nida, going up against Ahmed Sami. And then you have Tariq Ismail and Taha Ben Daud. And these guys are 3-0. 5-0, 7-0, 8-1. These are prospects. So here's where the PFL makes a mistake. They have these 3 fights that are all fantastic fights. I'm going to be honest. UFC championship level fights. But from there, with the exception of the McKee and Paul Hughes fight, the card just completely falls off a cliff. The Halfie and Stotts redeems it a little bit. 20-2 bantamweight. UFC level talent at 135, could be a ranked bantamweight at 135 in the UFC. But then the rest of this is disgraceful. This is your biggest night, PFL. You guys had all this other stuff going on at the top of the card, but the promotion's not there for one, and I'll get to that in a second. The card falls off a cliff. Who's matchmaking these? Ray Sefo? Does Ray Sefo have any MMA fights? What are we doing here? What is this matchmaking? Ray Sefo and Mike Kogan. Who... You know what, man? Maybe I'm giving you too much of a hard time. Maybe the PFL's squeezing you guys budget-wise because they said, we had to give Francis $8 million and all these other people millions or hundreds of thousands. We can't afford anything other than prospects on the rest of the card. Maybe that's what happened. But as I look at this, I say, wow, UFC-level pay-per-view, in terms of talent, not promotion or hype, but talent-wise, skill-wise, UFC-level pay-per-view, and then just disgraceful with the exception of this fight right here, but disgraceful. And that's what brings me to my answer as to, can the PFL compete with the UFC? And my answer is honestly no, because this is their biggest card and they have 3 very, very good title fights. 2 of them are bolstered by former UFC champions. So the talent's there. I'll be honest, the talent is there, but the product that the PFL is putting on is not there. I have watched PFL cards before, long periods of just idle, like a wide shot over the crowd or over the arena while there's a graphic playing on the screen or the PFL graphic is on the screen. They'll have minutes of dead air in between fights. They don't have promos that they cut to like the UFC. The pacing's not good. And that brings me to the product, because there's something about the PFL that a lot of people that are MMA fans can't shake from their head, is that the PFL's just weaker. It's a B-level promotion. And when you sign people that are UFC, not rejects, but cast outs, I guess you could say, that doesn't help your case at all. I've made some videos that are very, very negative towards the way that the PFL does business. I've done some videos in a very positive way saying, hey, this brings fighters other opportunities to negotiate when there's a big league that's not the UFC. There's somewhere else to go for them to get money, whether it's one championship, Bellator, PFL and Bellator are the same thing now. So there was 2 or 3, now there's 2. There's just something about the product that I think a lot of UFC fans just find lame or dorky or cringy. There's just something about it that they don't like. And they ran a hit piece on Kayla Harrison the day of her fight against Ketlin Vieira on the Pereira card that just happened. I didn't like that. Their product is bad. I keep circling back to the product. They have amazing fighters, but the fighters are not the only product. The product is actually what's being brought to you on a television screen. All of this, what, $20 million, whatever they spent on this event, all this organization, all this money invested from the Saudis and all these other different capital investors that they have. And all they're really going to get out of it is probably Francis Ngannou getting knocked out by a younger, bigger guy. It's certainly possible, and I could see it happen. He just got knocked out by AJ, who's close to Ferreira's size. I think this card ends up being, I don't want it to be, because I want it to succeed. I want the PFL to be a B level that's big. I don't want it to be just like a minor league. I want it to be a B level. And I don't think this is going to do that, but I think this card is going to just be an egg on the face moment. You're probably going to get a lot of stinkers, and the pacing is going to be terrible for the first like 7 fights. And then you're going to have Eblen and Edwards not deliver. Cyborg and Pacheco maybe deliver, but nobody really cares. And then Francis might get stretched out. So that's my thoughts, guys. I don't think, based on the product, the matchmaking's fine. But the rest of the card, like on their big fights, the ones that are gimmies, you go, oh yeah, Francis Ngannou against the champion you have. Oh, Cris Cyborg, Pacheco, Kayla Harrison's not there. Oh yeah, Eblen and Fabian Edwards, 2 of the biggest names on the Bellator roster right now. Boom. Easy, easy, easy. That's not great matchmaking when the fights are put in your lap like this. The rest of the card, I give them a little bit of credit for McKee and Hughes. That's a good fight. But the rest of it, this is going to be some Dagestani. I see a lot of Georgian. I see a lot of Russian. You guys know what I'm saying? I'm seeing a lot of noise over here, and I'm seeing a lot of EV and OV ending names that make me think that this is going to be 7 fights of lay and pray and win by points. And then we get into the fights that we care about. So that's my thoughts on the full card for PFL Brace for Impact. You guys let me know, can the PFL right now or ever, I don't know, ever compete at the level of the UFC? Can they ever come close? Because the big fights, they're coming close in terms of talent and skill, but the product's not there. So let me know your thoughts. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you're interested in supporting the channel further, then become a channel member today for access to members only live streams, vlogs, and some other members perks. So click the link in the description down below or the join button on our channel homepage to become a member today. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World, and go check out my weekly comedy podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo. Both of those are linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and we'll see you next time.